Give me 1 second.
Well, it's recording.
Well, I know, but you got to give me a second. I need to pause so I can edit this later. It can't be right into talking. Just smile. Just look pretty. Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to I think I said Phelps. Hold on. Let me start that over.
It's okay. Michael Phelps. He was an Olympian.
Michael Phelps. Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to this week's episode of the Legal Beagle podcast. This week, we are joined by Mr. Todd Springer. If you don't know, after this podcast, you will know a bit more about Todd Springer, but I will tell you, Todd Springer is one of the foremost leading experts in premise liability cases anywhere in the world, not just here in Arizona, but all throughout the world. He is nationally acclaimed. He's run an Ironman. He makes cheese in his spare time. Welcome, Todd Springer. Do you not make cheese? No, you don't make cheese.
I do. In fact, I've got a batch brewing right now.
I bet it smells potent in your house.
It's gnarly.
Yeah. So, Todd, for those that don't know, and we have viewers that are not attorneys that won't understand maybe some of the in-depth explanations that you can get into. So try to keep it a little surface level, but then we'll have a lot of attorneys that watch this. Tell me first and foremost, as a premise liability expert, what that means and what you do.
Well, a lot of what I look at are site conditions and different elements of buildings. So premise liability is anything to do with the premises as I understand it. What I have knowledge of certain systems and building components and human factors, and I apply those. So it could be, how is a door supposed to work? How hard is it supposed to be to open a door? What are walkway conditions supposed to be like both in and around a building? What's required for stairways? Certain maintenance items, how are floors supposed to be maintained? How are those maintenance activities supposed to be carried out? And those are governed by various means. There's the building codes, which govern construction, and then there's standards, third-party consensus standards, which establish a standard of care. So those things are applied to different incidents that occur on a premises.
So say someone's at a Burger King and they slip and fall and they get hurt, and then they call an attorney, and that attorney then reaches out to you to say, Todd, I need to know if there's a case here. To the person that fell, they think, look, there was a wet surface in Burger King and I fell, I'm hurt, it's Burger King's fault. Is it that cut and dry?
No. I mean, so this is where, in my world, I talk about all those things that we just discussed. And then from your world, you talk about other stuff, and it's the marriage of those two things that really answer your question. That's how I view it. The way I look at those instances is there's basically three prongs, if you will, that I look at. And was it a hazardous condition? Was it readily identifiable by someone? And the part where it gets a little bit on the edge of my areas, if you will, is notice. So in an attorney's world, someone has to have known about this condition, or I believe created it. And so, if I was just there as another customer and I got a drink and I spilled and you walked behind me and you slipped, as I understand it, it's very hard to say that's Burger King's fault.
How come? I think you're right, but explain why.
So the interpretation I have is the notice. It's what is Burger King's standard of care to follow every single customer around and make sure they never spill. Rather, the general standard of care is that every organization should have some system in place for ensuring that these things are minimized, right? They're mitigated to some extent. So in grocery stores, they'll have store sweeps. And quite often it'll be more often in a produce section and then less often around the store. Burger King, how often are you guys out walking the lobby looking for spills, picking up trash? Were you in the middle of a lunch rush? Where it all gets super fun when I talk to every client is the term reasonable. This term reasonable gets thrown around, and what is reasonable? And to be able to discuss the factors that go into that is what I do. What is reasonable? Well, there are these things that people can do. There are these things that people don't. They did have this schedule. If you look at a log and they were there at 7:58 and the next time was 9:14, but that's their breakfast rush and they're supposed to do it every hour, then it's, well, they were an hour and 17 minutes apart. So, did they fail, or what's reasonable?
When you look at reasonableness, do you look at it from the standpoint of an objective finding versus a subjective finding? Because what's reasonable to you may not be reasonable to me. So as an expert, do you have to live in that world of objectiveness?
Well, we're supposed to. I've seen a lot of different stuff in my time. So maybe different people have different understandings of that, or different experts do. But, I used to, when I started, I would say whether or not a condition was unreasonably dangerous. Well, as I went along, I started looking into where that came from. And my current understanding, if my memory is accurate today, is that that's a jury instruction. And so I can say there was no reason for this condition to exist. If someone, puts a trap door in a floor, it's like, well, there's no reason for that, and someone's going to get hurt, and that is dangerous, and therefore you could say it's unreasonably dangerous. But as far as, the Burger King incident, talking about the factors that go into that really lead up to that. If they were 2.5 hours apart on their store sweep log, and then you see a video and 2 employees are on Facebook for 30 minutes blowing off the store sweep, I think, that's an easy one to explain, but it's the first thing that popped in my head. So I really take all the data I can and explain the significance of it and apply it to, like I said, codes, standards of care, and then I can discuss the human factors that go into things. Are people multitasking? Are they going down a stairway with a heavy floral pattern with grand distracting views and they misstep? Are those things have been studied, and I can talk about those from a scientific perspective. So
is it safe to say over your career thus far, you've seen thousands of cases? Is that a stretch to say thousands?
No, I've seen thousands of cases, but not thousands of premises cases.
Okay. So with specifically your premise cases, without disclosing anything that you can't disclose, what are some of the craziest ones that just float to the top of your head right now as I ask you this question, where you're like, I can't believe this happened?
Oh, a kid lost his finger in a hotel door.
In a hotel door?
Yeah, the front door to the room the room faced the beach. And if you've ever been to California or anywhere with, either of the coasts, you get winds that come in and go out depending on the time of day. Well, if you have your sliding glass door open to your balcony, because everyone wants that balcony view, right? That wind is coming in or out. And so depending on the time of day, that door with an automatic closer either won't close or it'll slam close.
Ooh.
Depending on how that's adjusted. Yeah. And so that one was very interesting because, we didn't get to see it through. I never get to see these cases all the way through to see I shouldn't say never, but what the jury or trier of fact would ultimately decide. But that's a tough one if you're that hotel, because what do? Do you have a door that doesn't close? So, they ultimately had signage by the sliding glass door that said, please keep this door closed at all times. And then that's where I can talk about warnings, national standard color coding, or, for warnings, yellow's caution. It's kind of, bad. Orange is a warning. It's a little more dangerous. Red is like, oh, someone's going to die. Did they color code that? Should they? If it's just words on a piece of paper, Is it just informational? You get into those things. So that was one that was pretty crazy. I had another one where a lady's husband ran her over with his fifth wheel trailer.
Oh boy.
And that one was very crazy because just all that you get into all this nuance, did she walk between there? They've never done that. She's in her 70s. It's pretty hard to walk between a truck and a fifth wheel trailer because there's this big gooseneck and, what are the conditions of the surface she was on? Could any of that have contributed to any event like a fall that caused her to go there? Getting into all that. Some of my favorites are when there's video. I was just writing a report the other day and there's video, and inevitably someone gets deposed. The plaintiff will get deposed, and then they're talking under oath. And which foot was it? Was it your left foot? Was it your right foot? Did your pinky toe hit the ground first? Was it your next toe in? Was it your big toe? Is your second toe in longer than your big toe? And would that have hit first? You get into all these hyper detailed questions sometimes. And, when you study psychology a little bit, people don't remember that stuff. They remember they fell and then they slipped, and they always, it felt like I slipped on ice, because a slip is a slip is a slip. It's your foot goes out. There's nothing there. All feels the same. So, you get into those, and then you watch the video, and it wasn't their right foot. It was their left foot. They weren't holding on to the handrail with their left hand. It was their right hand. That's where you guys argue it out. And I just say, hey, look, the psychology says it doesn't really matter. They fell. They remember the sensation. They remember their emotions, the feelings. That's what we remember. And then when you go look at this situation, it's like, oh, and the stairway went 7 inch, and then this last little drop, or this big drop at the bottom, and that's where they fell, and that violates code. So do we really care which foot it is?
So full transparency, you and I have worked on cases together, and one of the things that really attracted me to the work that you do is you'll tell me when you don't think there's a strong case because it's missing one of these elements. Either it isn't a hazard, it isn't identifiable, there wasn't notice, or there was. Either way, right? It could cut either way. But you do a good job of just being honest with me about what to expect with the case, and say, look, I don't know if you have what you're looking for here. Why have you, because I can't imagine, and I work with other experts, they're not all as honest as you. Why have you, and I know that's sad to say, but it's also truthful. And I'm just wondering why you have taken that approach to your work. Because I imagine when you say, I don't think you have something, that's a case you're not going to get hired on. That's a case you're not going to make money working on. So it cuts against you. It's not in your interest to say there isn't something there, but you've always been honest about it. Why have you adopted that approach to your practice?
Well, number one, that's how I was trained. So at my company, my boss would love to do this work. And I don't know if this is really how they do it, but as we've heard, they do it in New Zealand, where two experts get locked in a room, and when they agree, they can come out. And so it just is what it is. It's like there's no, unless one guy's paying the other guy just to get out of the room, it is what it is. Then there's a couple other things. There's some gray areas in all of this, right? It's never black and white, or you wouldn't need people to talk about stuff. And, you explore those gray areas, and you can go down different paths of logic and thought and reasoning. And every once in a while you'll do that, and someone else will come along later in the case when it's not, so fun, and they'll bring up some stuff you didn't think about. And then you're sitting there going, hey, I didn't, and that's never fun. And then lastly, I always joke and say, I'm not retiring anytime soon. When I'm retiring, this is the joke. When I'm retiring, I'll just send you my report. You write it up. I'll read it. Depending on how far you went, I'll tell you the price it's going to be to sign it. Until that day, I have to work again. So one, I don't want to get excluded. Two, I may not get hired on that case, but I'll get called on the next one, and the next one, That's it, the theory. And it's way better to work a more solid case. And from the bottom of all of that comes just kind of who we are, I think, as people. Am I really in this to try to help you build a case? Or is it better if I tell you all this stuff? Because like I said, a lot of times someone else is going to point these things out later.
Well, you're right. And frankly, I've gone as far as to share some of the analysis that you've given us with the potential client when we turn down the opportunity to represent them because we don't think there's a case after you evaluate it and we talk and we kind of debate whether there's enough there. And I think potential clients appreciate that. At least the ones I walk them through what your analysis is. And I say, look, this is why there may be some challenges. You're certainly welcome to go get a second opinion or a third if you want, but I don't think that there's a reason to pursue this because of X, Y, and Z rather than, sorry, we can't help. And I don't tell them anything. Really being honest with them and upfront and just candid with them and say, look, we talked to our expert, he evaluated it, and there's nothing here. We've hired you on cases, I know this, where we've actually taken on representation and then had to disengage, which is a uncomfortable position to be in. But I would much rather tell the client early, once we discover that there isn't a case to pursue, that we're not going to take it any further than to tell them way later or have a really bad outcome at trial if it ends up there. So I would rather be honest with them. And I think that's probably why we work well together. Let me ask you a question.
I think there's that. I just want to finish something. It's kind of the golden rule too. I mean, if I was in your shoes, what I want, come on. What I want you going, yeah, it's great because of this and this. And then down the road, you're going, well, this guy is an idiot. So it's just, no.
Why did you get into this line of work?
Because I needed a job.
Tell me a bit more about that. I know this story, but our listeners don't. So I'm interested for you to kind of share that. It's a good story.
Okay. So, I did not want to be a traditional engineer. Sitting at a desk, doing the same thing every day, designing HVAC systems for a house every day, forever, killed me inside. And I had a friend who worked at this company, Augsburger Com. And, he would tell me about his job and they get to figure these things out, and look at stuff. And it's like this mystery. And so I went through I took a test and got my EIT and went and met with the owner. And we went through some things and a couple cases out in the shop. And, I was young and super green. And I did point out, I remember one specific thing that I pointed out to him on some testing they did that they hadn't thought about. And I got one of these. And then we went and had lunch and we drove back and he said, well, we're not really hiring right now, but it was great to meet you. And I thought, why did you meet me? And so at the time, I had called a couple other places and everyone wants someone with experience. And so I said, well, what about an internship? And before he could say anything, I said, you wouldn't have to pay me. And he looked at me and said, what? And I said, yeah, if I could still work somewhere else part-time, then I would intern part-time and just do whatever. And you could decide at some point whether or not it was going to work. And, I've always felt a great line from a movie that I watched a long time ago. What one man can do, another can do. And if you haven't seen the movie, it's The Edge and it's Anthony Hopkins. They got to kill a bear and he's getting Alec Baldwin all fired up because Alec Baldwin's this, anyways. So I just figured I can do this. Why can't I do this? I've been able to do most things that I've put my mind to. So I went and I interned. And, my boss being the guy he is, he said, well, I can't not pay you. So, we agreed on some hourly rate. A few months later, he decided to bring me on full time.
Wow. What a cool story.
It's pretty cool. You know, I don't know that many people are willing to do that anymore. I tell him, we've hired a couple younger guys, and I said, you know, I would almost expect that. You show up to my door with not a lot to offer. What am I going to just write you a big check and, you know, spend 2 years training you before you're really, you know, I mean, come on.
Yeah, but that's quite the sacrifice. And I think you're right. I'm not trying to knock generations that are coming up behind us, but I think there is less of an interest in sacrificing like that, in doing the work unpaid and putting in your time to get to a point where you're worthy of a full-time position. I don't see a lot of that in the people that are now leaving college, and you know, I don't want to typecast a certain, you know, generation, but I think that I see that a lot more. People come to me all the time, no experience, and they want a shot, but they're not willing to do it for free. They want to get paid. They want to
get paid well.
Yeah. They expect a decent wage.
Yeah. They go, okay, you know, starting salaries between A and B, I want to be close to B on the high end.
Right.
And it's like, well, what do you bring into the table?
That's exactly right.
I mean, when I started, I don't know what it is, but you know, I came in early, I stayed late. My boss would yell at me to go home. You know, get out of here, Springer. You know, it's 6 o'clock, go home. And what else freaked me out is I came, you know, we were on food stamps when I grew up. And then all of a sudden now I'm billing people, you know, $180 an hour. And I'm going, I don't even know what I'm talking about. How am I billing? You know, and I didn't know what went out the door billing wise or not. So I'm sure none of it went out the door. But so I had to learn a lot. And then I looked at it the other way too. The faster I can learn and the better I can be, then the more I can make. So from, you know, kind of like it's an endless spectrum, you know, but as long as you can get in, then it's only up, and how far up is up to you. And that's what I tell the new guys, you know, the better you get, the faster, the sooner, the more you try, the harder you work, the shorter that ladder gets, if you will.
Do you still like this work? Are you still intrigued by the different cases that come across your desk?
That is a great question. It ebbs and flows. There are times when, you know, I got a bunch of cases that aren't great. There's still points to be made that, you know, favor my client, if you will. There's points that don't, and it's not a great case for them, but it's not a throwaway case, if you will. And you get a bunch of those, and they're all the same thing. It kind of gets old. Now, recently, I've remotivated myself, and the way I did that is I just said, look, I'm just going to do the best job I can, and, you know, figure out the rest later, you know, all the paperwork and all that, if you will. But I want to explore my curiosity in these things and learn again and dig deep. Even if my client wants to hem and haw, oh, you know, do we really need to do that? It's like, well, I'm just going to do it. And then when I come to you and with what I did, then we can talk about all that other stuff. And kind of back to the, if you build it, they will come mentality. You know, then maybe you guys won't be the people I work for. Maybe I'll work for the people who want to go that far.
Sure.
And who are willing to, you know, put in the time and the effort and value the case as that important. And sure, there are ones where it's not, you know, you gotta know that too. But so I've started doing that, and recently it's become very interesting again.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. And then plus, you know, we've got 2 little kids, and, you know, life has taken that journey, and we went down some roads there. So, you know, you're all of a sudden you're very busy.
Yeah. You're not only just an expert, you're a father, you're a husband. There's a lot more to life than just the work you do.
Yeah. It's so at one point that kind of, I remember coming into work and telling my boss, you know, and this was when I first had my first son. I said, you know, I just kind of stopped caring now. And he looked at me, thinking, well, that's not good. And I said, well, no, not necessarily, but not caring about the result so much as just come to work, put in the time, and put in the effort, almost like an athlete would do. And then on game day, it's just going to be what it's going to be. And the kids really put that in perspective for me, because I'm very hard on myself. And it was like, look, man, none of this stuff really matters. I mean, it matters, but at the end of the day, I come home and these two things, that's it.
Sure.
That's what life is. So,
what rattles you? Does anything rattle you? You seem so calm. I've been in depositions with you. I've worked with you on cases. You just don't seem to get rattled. What rattles you? What gets to Todd Springer?
When things get to the people I love.
So it has to be on a very personal level.
Yeah. And then I had that conversation with my dad the other day. He stopped by, I building something in the backyard he's helping me with. And, I said, I thought about something, how people can go to these extremes and, but if something happened to my kid, we talked about not doing it, but understanding that emotion that people go through that can drive them to these insane places. And, because you love your parents, right?
Sure.
And you love your wife, and then you have kids, and everyone says it. It's like, it's just a little different. It's just a little different. So yeah, that gets me. Yeah, I don't know. That stuff really gets me.
It suits you well in your professional career, or I guess that's saying the same thing, your professional career. It's kind of what would you call that? It's not even an oxymoron. That's just like saying the same thing twice. In your profession, it suits you well because you are very calm. I know you do work for both plaintiffs and defendants. You don't just do work for one or the other, which for those non-attorneys, I'll quickly explain. That simply means that Todd will take work from businesses, premise owners, or people that actually would be responsible for the premise, as well as the injured people that may fall or somehow get hurt on a premise. And the reason that's important to understand is there are experts out there that only work for defendants. There are experts out there that only work for plaintiffs. It doesn't give you a good deal of balance because you get known in the profession, and I'll let you follow up on this, but you get known in the profession as a whore. I'll just use the word. That's what you get, because you're being typecasted as someone who only does work for one side. So you're going to say what that side wants. To your joke earlier about you just write the report, that's kind of the idea that these experts that only do work on one side of the table get. I don't know that it's always true, and I certainly don't want to pigeonhole people, but I think that that's a fair statement. What are your thoughts?
Like anything else, it's a spectrum. So there are people that are whores for both sides. They just take things too far, in my opinion. And, when I've gone to trial opposite some of these people, the jury picks up on that. So at the end of the day, you got to talk to people, right? And it's hard to sell snake oil. So, if you're not playing for the end game, why are you playing? Then there are people, there are some people that I believe aren't plaintiffs experts or defense experts. They are just minded in that direction. So there are some people that just believe the world should be safer and that no one is doing enough to make it safer. And there are some people, that this maybe is like a farmer or somebody who's like, do you know what I do every day and how dangerous everything I do is? Why are you crying over slipping and falling on this walkway? I had to stick my hand in the machine the other day or I was going to lose $100,000 worth of, whatever. It's like, so there are these, there's spectrums of people. And I think I can pretty much tell when it's one where, when they're in one of those categories, if you will, but some of them, and I think that's why some of them do very well, is because they truly believe everything they're saying. And at the end of the day, if you're going to You have to sell your opinions to the trier of fact. Whether or not you want to use that terminology, that's fine. But if you don't believe what you're selling, it's very hard to sell it.
Do you
So
think it's a harsh word to use, selling your opinion, not just telling the facts and talking about the standards that are in place? I mean, I understand why you're saying that. I'm just asking if you think that's a harsh term. Is it really a sale? Are plaintiffs' attorneys we're taking a little deviation from the conversation, but are we really just selling a jury on our side of the story? Is that really what this is?
Well, so there's two parts to it, right? There's the facts and the standards, and then there's the gray area. And in that gray area, there's my interpretation of the data and how it applies to those facts and standards of care and those things. And so that's why they're called my opinions, right? Because if it was just all factual, I'm not there. You're not there. They put the numbers in a machine and out comes the verdict.
Right.
Okay, 37% plaintiff's fault, 42% owners, 7% Martians, the rest, whatever. So sell isn't the best word, but my conviction in my opinions will affect the likelihood of someone else aligning with them.
You gave me a term early on a case that we worked on, and you talked about this term, and it has stuck with me. And I think it's important that our viewers hear from you what you mean by this. When you talk about personal responsibility, how does that play in a personal liability case, premise liability case?
That is, so you asked me about some cases that stand out too, so I got to bring one of those up. But that is almost like a taboo word in my field. On either side, I never hear people talk about it. There are a couple guys that I pretty much only see on the defense side that'll talk about it. But we all have some responsibility for ourselves, right? No one falls on a walkway because they were just standing there and the walkway moved.
Right.
I mean, maybe at the airport, but
a moving sidewalk, is that the exception?
An escalator. So, there is that element of things, and people have to stay, I think good experts have to stay cognizant of that, because you can have what may appear to be a great plaintiff's case, but at the end of the day, there's some element of personal responsibility. And if I sit on the stand and someone says, do you believe this person has any fault in this at all? That's a loaded question. Okay. First and foremost, that's really up for a jury to decide. Okay. But if you wore flip-flops and decided to go for a jog in the rain, those aren't the best choices combined together. And that factors into your responsibility for whatever occurred. Whether or not you understood the ramifications of those decisions, that's different, but there are still consequences to every decision. So the case I want to mention, it involved a lady and her husband. They rented a hotel room, and they wanted I think jacuzzi's a brand name, so a spa tub with jets and whatever, right? Well, they're usually a little bigger or a little taller, right? It's an experience. You're not just getting in there to take a bath. And she fell getting in. And ultimately, I was being deposed. And the plaintiff's attorney, I was working for the hotel. And the plaintiff's attorney says to me, well, did you take her height and weight into consideration? And I said, what do you mean? And he goes, well, you address human factors. Aren't those important as to understanding whether or not she can get into the tub and how difficult it is? And this is when the first time I used the term personal responsibility in a deposition, I go, I'm going to throw some words out here that everyone's going to kind of shudder, because no one says them in these rooms inside these walls, but everyone has some responsibility for themselves. There's a personal responsibility aspect to this whole thing. And the moment someone's checking in at a hotel and the front desk says, well, based on your height and your weight, you can only have these rooms. I said, You're in a completely different lawsuit right now, and I'm not the expert in that lawsuit. That's what happens when you get to that. So I can talk about how those affect it, but ultimately she's the only one who can gauge what she's capable of. And so she has that personal responsibility. I can tell you if the tub violated any standards or anything, but that is what it is. And my grandma was a great example for me. As she got older, she wouldn't step up curbs. She would purposely park to where she could go up the curb cut, the accessible route. She didn't have a handicap decal in her car, but now we're getting into the ADA and the sliding scale that goes on there when people age and things deteriorate. And so she was aware enough to say, this is the safest route for me.
I like that. Final question. It's a two-parter. It's two parts. If a normal person, not someone in this profession, not someone normal, if typical everyday person is watching this and they have fallen and they're listening to this podcast, watching this podcast because they want to hear more about it and they want to understand if they have a case, give me a few sentences, a few thoughts that you would tell that person directly if they can't contact you and maybe they don't have an attorney and they just want to know, do I have a case or did I just mess up? What would you tell those people?
This is a tough one because we're very emotionally driven creatures, I think. But the first thing I would say is think about what you were doing and, your actions on that day and leading up to that event and how safe you were being. Think about that. Were you texting and, driving? Were you looking at yourself in a mirror as you walk by or, your reflection, and then you walked into a planter, then is it really the planter's fault? Things like that. And then think about if you owned the business. Okay. And you got to sit down, you got to take a minute. Okay. And people don't want to do this all the time, but if you're saying there's 50,000 on the line or more, take a minute. Okay, guys, just take a minute and think about it. If I own this business, would that make sense to me that I shouldn't be allowed to do that? Or would I view that as my fault? If someone slips on a spilled soda at Burger King and I own the Burger King, it's like, well, is that my responsibility? So, just really take a second and look at it from both sides, because inevitably a defense attorney is going to be hired and they are going to defend their client because that is their job. And they are going to find every way they know how to poke a hole in your case and find you at fault. Right. And so if you can think about some of those ways where you might be at fault, that'll give you a good perspective on, okay, maybe this wasn't all on them, or maybe it was, or maybe it's 50-50. Maybe I wasn't being too reasonable, but the guy was mopping and there were no signs up. That doesn't make sense. It's real easy to put signs up. Come on, you just mop half the floor at a time, put some signs up around that half, and then go over. That's pretty easy. So you just think it through, write it down, draw a picture. These are kind of the fundamentals of what I do. And when since I've been training people again, it's like, I need to go back to that too. Draw a picture, write it down. What do we know? What don't we know? And that'll give you some insight.
That's great advice. Second part of that question. If you're an attorney, a young attorney that is doing personal injury work, and you maybe haven't had any premise liability cases, but you want to get into this, what would you tell that attorney to be aware of or to think about with these types of cases?
Same stuff. The biggest thing I would tell them is you need to know an expert. For most of these, you're going to need an expert. I don't know. There are some people who just don't use them, and I don't know what the pros and cons are financially, because that's ultimately the attorney's game at the end of the day, is the dollars. But you need to know how honest your expert is with you. And the way I would do that is I would make up a junk case and call an expert and go, I got 2 cases I want to talk to you about. And I would tell them about the real case and hear what they had to say. And then I'd say, okay, I got another one. And this guy's walking and he just steps off a curb, but someone honked their horn as they're going by. Right. So this business owns the curb. I don't know, be creative, think of something, maybe call another attorney would be another great one, but get involved in associations and network, but, come to them with something where they should hesitate. And if they don't hesitate, you got to be able to call. I mean, if it's a flat dog, you got to be able to call it a dog and move on.
Well, in the interest of transparency, I'll tell you all that I did not do what Todd is recommending when I first started out, and I lost on what's called a motion for summary judgment on a premise liability case, simply because I thought I knew too much. I thought I was too smart. I didn't need anyone's help. And had I had a conversation with Todd, we would have recognized the pitfalls in that case. Not saying the case wouldn't have progressed. I'm saying that I would have understood it better, and I would have understood what the problems were and what the challenges were going to be as the case went forward, instead of losing on that motion for summary judgment. So I would tell you all, get an expert early, have conversations, find people you trust, and ask those questions. Pay for the evaluations, right? It's not a big deal. If you have to, pay for it. It's worth it. It'll save you a boatload.
A lot of times, I think a seasoned expert can give you a good idea early on. Now, when you go down the due diligence, things can change all the time. Someone can be deposed and something comes out. So, but you can give doesn't take a long time looking at a few facts and digging in for a little bit. No, you shouldn't really have to do too much on some of these. Can I elaborate on that case you brought up a little bit?
For sure. Go ahead.
Because we talked about it.
I know it's weird how this case ended up bringing you. We worked on this case, but not together.
Yeah. So I ended up, I think you told me a little bit about the facts of the case. And then later on, I ended up being hired by the defense attorney on that case. And it was just interesting how that played out.
I would agree.
Yeah.
But the cautionary tale is don't be afraid to pick up the phone and have a conversation and learn what you don't know. And don't think you know it all, because you certainly don't. I don't think Todd would say that. I certainly wouldn't say that now. And it was good that I learned it early in my career, not late in my career. And it's helped me on a lot of cases that we have not taken because of that lesson, and having now conversations with you about whether there's something there. I remember going and doing a site inspection on a case, brought you photos. We went over them together. We talked about it, and you're like, I just don't like this one. And we just said it wasn't the right case. And the plaintiff didn't want to hear it, and maybe she went and hired someone else. I don't know. But, I think sometimes your profession can be defined by the cases you don't take, not the ones you do.
Yeah. And I'd say that certainly affects your professional growth,
Sure.
And I get into this. I do other stuff involving, equipment or different things, right? Some materials, things, a lot of stuff involving contractors and, their work, right? And it's almost the same thing there. If you're working on vehicles and someone tells you, I don't want to pay for that, do you have to fix their vehicle? Do you fix it so that the airbag won't deploy because that's what they paid for? It's the same thing. I mean, you got to know when to walk away. You got to know when to say, hey, I don't need your $500 or your $1,000. Take your car to someone else. Because at the end of the day, they're going to get in an accident and the airbag's not going to go off. And then they're going to come back and say, hey, you said you could fix it. And there's no paper trail that says all this stuff. So if if you're too greedy and you're taking a bunch of bad cases because you think you need it, it's going to bite you. From an expert, from an attorney, in any profession, you got to know when to walk away.
Sage advice. Mr. Todd Springer, thank you so much for being on this podcast. What kind of cheese are you brewing today? Is it a cheddar? Do you have a Munster? Swiss? What are we doing here?
It's some Famunda cheese.
I'm going to leave that one alone. Todd, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And it was great having you on the podcast.
Thank you.